This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for this program is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Tonight on Newsmakers, Memphis Mayor Jim Strickland. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with the basics. Why politics? What got you involved?
Well, this is a long answer, so I hope you give me a little while. It kind of started in 1976. I was almost 12 years old. The presidential election was going on. And there's always that first presidential election you remember. And that's the first one I remember. And that's when President Carter beat President Ford. And it kind of piqued my interest, and I remember getting a weekly reader that had him on the cover. And as a Catholic, I started wondering, had there ever been a Catholic president? And that led to researching and President Kennedy, our only Catholic president. And so I started learning about him, watching his speeches, read Profiles in Courage, and really became inspired by his words of serving others and getting involved. And he was assassinated a year before I was born, so we didn't even overlap on this world. But really became inspired by him, as a whole generation did. And then later in life, it was either in high school or college, I sat down and read the whole New Testament at one time, like over a 2-day period of time. Had never done that. And you can't read the New Testament without realizing we are called to serve others, especially those less fortunate. I mean, it's a repeated mandate. And so the call to service that I sort of heard from President Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, to what Jesus was mandating in the New Testament, I figured, they were both service. And public service and my faith kind of fit together hand in glove. So I really became more inspired to do that, and I volunteered for some campaigns in the 80s when I was in college and law school. Became involved early 90s in the Democratic Committee, the local Shelby County Committee, then became chairman, and then off from there.
The first elections you were involved in, didn't you knock on doors in New Hampshire? Didn't you tell me that one time?
Well, in 2000.
That was in 2000.
When Vice President Gore was running for the Democratic nomination, Calvin Anderson, David Koch, and I and others went up to New Hampshire, and that's a great experience. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. You ought to, if you're really interested in politics, go up there, knock on doors. The snow's,
right.
Well,
I remember when you were running for mayor, you knocked on my door.
Yes.
You kind of came up and you were walking. It was it seemed like it was summer. It was about 800 degrees outside, and you came knocking on my door, ready to make another pitch. And I said, well, I've heard it. No,
but one of the things I've learned in politics, and I got this from Harold Byrd and Bobby Byrd and Dan Byrd. I forgot to mention, in '84, I interned in the state legislature as part of this, and one of my representatives was Dan Byrd, and the family owns the Bank of Bartlett, been involved in the community for a long time, and so I became close to them, and Harold Byrd told me one time, the best way to get anyone's vote, no matter what you're running for, is look them in the eye and ask for their vote. And the smaller district you're running for, the more you can actually do that. I did a lot of it when I ran for city council. No one's probably knocked on more doors than I did. And I even found time in my mayor's race to do that. You can't knock on the whole city, right. So we just kind of picked different areas.
Your first election, was it a high school, student council? I
went to Christian Brothers High School, and I ran for the commissioner of intramurals and lost to a good friend of mine named Tim Buckley. Who's now gone on to sports journalism. I stayed with politics. He got his fill, I guess, and decided he went into it. And then in college at the University of Memphis, I was student body president. Became good friends with Alan Crone and David Kustoff, Trey Hargett, David Upton, Mara Sullivan, all the Jay Bailey, all these folks that have kind of gone on to politics in Memphis.
And your first city council race, am I right that you lost your first city council
I lost. I went door to door for 6 months. John Burgess, who's a sort of a mentor of mine, decided not to run again for city council, and I ran for his district, which is Midtown East Memphis. I was really a nobody. I'd been Democratic Party chairman, but that didn't get you any name recognition. And ran against Carol Chumney, who just come out of the legislature for 14 or 16 years, built up a big name, and Dr. George Flynn, who could spend $500,000. So I did my best. I went door to door, and this is an interesting thing. You're broken up into precincts. That's where you vote. The precincts that I went door to door on, big time, 10 precincts, I won every one of those precincts. Problem was, in the other precincts, they never heard of me and I didn't win, so I didn't even make the runoff. And then 4 years later, Carol decided to run for mayor and open that seat again.
And what did you learn in terms of defeat? I mean, it's got to be, you put a whole lot of time, a whole lot of effort, whatever money you've raised, you've got people to trust and support you and work for you, and then you lose. I mean, is that a dark moment, or is that a moment where you think, no, I just need to learn from it?
Both. Winning is a lot more fun. But I distinctly remember we had the, quote, victory party at my house. And when I found out I lost, I called Carol and George and congratulated them. And I remember going out and the house was full. And I felt worse for those folks who'd worked so hard to get me elected. I almost felt like I let them down and felt bad about that. And I really felt bad about losing for probably a year. Because I went door to door for 6 months. My whole life was focused on that. And I really wanted to serve. So it's just tough, but I learned a lot. I learned that the birds were right, that the best way to, where I knocked door to door, I won their vote. But name recognition means a lot. And you can either buy it or you earn it over time. Well, I couldn't outspend George Flynn, and Carol had a 14, 16-year head start on me on name recognition. So I couldn't outdo either one of them. And
so you then win the seat in city council. That was what year, give or take?
2007.
Okay. And what was the biggest surprise, and 2007 is right before then the crash in 08 into 09. Right. So it's a tough time to be in politics, a tough time to be in business anyway. But in terms of the reality of being on city council, you learned what?
Well, city council changed a lot because of the recession. City council did a lot of zoning cases back in the sort of the growth days. In fact, Kenneth Whalum Sr. told me one time when he decided not to run again, he served 2 terms on the council and he decided not to run again. I was surprised. I was a young guy in politics. And I said, why are you not running again? He said, it's just a glorified zoning board, because they were doing zoning. Well, when I got elected in 07, sworn in January 1 of 08, we hardly did. Really, almost for my entire 8 years on the council, there was very little zoning work. They used to go till midnight. They used to meet every week. The council used to meet every week.
Versus now it's every other week.
Every other week, and they go to midnight because there were so many zoning applications. So it really, the zoning part almost completely went off. We'd have some, like the CVS at Union, that was a big controversial thing, but not much.
And one of the biggest through that period of time was, there was just a fiscal crisis on every level of federal, state, local government. There's in companies. The recession, which is a long time ago now, but is a pretty, still we live with, and probably will for many, many decades, scars from that. One of the biggest problems was what was called the pension crisis, and the need to people who felt that the city was on a trajectory, and a lot of cities, the states, Illinois for instance, were on these trajectories where these pensions that had been promised that were to employees for years and decades were unsustainable. What was that like? I don't remember, did you know that going into the job?
No.
Or were your eyes opened in the light of the financial crisis?
No, I had no expertise in pensions, didn't even know that was going to be an issue in 08 when I ran. But it became an issue. And I got to give Kemp Conrad probably credit. He's the first one who said, hey, the ARC, the annual required payment. It's called annual required payment, not annual requested payment, contribution. And so the city was not making its required contribution, and so the pension became underfunded. On a yearly basis, it's sort of like not making your monthly mortgage payment or not making it all. And Memphis was not unique. You mentioned Illinois, Chicago in particular. Dallas now is coming through, having problems. In hindsight, Chattanooga was underfunding its police and fire pension. And the state of Tennessee came in and said, hey, all cities, all counties, you have to fully fund your yearly contribution. You have to make your mortgage payment.
Right. Some of those votes resulted in, there were cutbacks to people's benefits at that time. What's that like? I mean, we start the show talking, you're here to serve. Awful. You're not here to, I don't think anybody runs for office to punish anyone. No. The presumption is that people, particularly fire and police and first responders, which is the bulk of the people who work for the city, no one wants to make that vote and hurt that individual. What was that like? It
was awful. I mean, it just was. Now, but it was worse for them than it was for me. So, I mean, you have to you can't feel sorry for yourself, but it was just not a good time for anyone. And it's been, for my year and a half basically on the job now, we went in saying, hey, we got to make it better for our employees, and that's why I focus so much on improving benefits, improving pay, coming up with a retention bonus for police officers, going out and meeting and listening to our employees and trying to correspond. We've improved their health care. We've put a lot of effort because I lived through that tough time, and we had to improve it for the benefit of our entire community. And we've made headway, and I've promised that we're going to make more headway.
You're now a year and a half, and as we record this, a year and a half or more into being mayor. The biggest surprise, or some of the biggest surprises? I mean, no one, very few people are mayor before they're mayor. It's not you don't go from being vice. I mean, it's a whole new experience to go from city council to being the chief executive, as it were, of the city of Memphis.
Well, you just let me give you a picture of who I was before. I was on the city council, which is a part-time thing, basically 2 days a month. And some emails and meetings in between, but you're not actually responsible for filling a pothole. You report a pothole and then I also had a small law firm where, we did everything. We went down and got the mail, we made our copies. I mean, we had a staff, but sometimes you just do what has to be done. Go to court and that sort of thing. And then become mayor of a city with 6,500 employees is a big difference. One surprise is I love it. How much I absolutely love this job every single day.
You would have to, because it's a nonstop job.
Right.
I mean, a typical day for you, in AC Wharton before you and so on, starts very early in the morning. Right. It doesn't end until you finish any number of receptions and events and memorials, good and bad, that you might have to go through that night. And it's 7 days a week in a lot of cases, right?
Absolutely. It is absolutely 7 days a week. Sometimes not all day, but certainly different events. We have a big city. We're 340 square miles. We have 650,000 people. I need to get out there. Last night I was in a neighborhood meeting. Tonight I'm speaking to another neighborhood. You got to get out in the community, and we're going 7 days a week to get out, trying to give our message and also trying to hear what other people have to say and run a government.
Yeah. One of the things I think you told me early into the job was that it was, I don't know if the word is frustrating, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there was the go where you didn't have time to stop and think. Right. I remember you talking about that, and trying to schedule some time just to stop and think about what's going on. And at one point I said, have you been able to do that? And you said, no, well, I give up on that. I don't know, has that changed at this point? I mean, is there more breathing room as you kind of find, and you had to hire a whole bunch of people and staff under you.
I remember when in the transition I was meeting with Mayor Wharton, and he said, Mina Beckton, who worked for him now works with me, was most of her job was scheduling. And I kept thinking, well, there's no way we'll make, that'll be half of what she does and another half we'll get something else. It is constant because schedules change and you got to cancel things, emergencies come up, because that's a point of contact for the public. And my chief of staff, Lisa Jeter, Mina and I struggle with blocking out time just to do work. What I call roll up your sleeves, work, and manage and look at things and follow up on things instead of just going from event to event to event. It's a struggle because you have to be out there. You have to do shows like this and talk to the media. You have to go to neighborhood events. You have to go welcome people to the city. But you also have to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Even though we have a great team, I still need to be involved.
It's interesting, and I've seen it having been at receptions or having been at things where you are, and I probably have done it to you actually as I think about it, where the number of times during a given day that someone says, "Hey, Mr. Mayor, it's great to see you, by the way," and they've got a by the way moment about an opinion about X, Y, or Z, or something that they want to get on your radar, must happen all day long. More than it must go.
I mean, but that's fine. If they really want me to take action, though, I ask them to email me. Because I truly cannot remember everything that somebody asked me to do. And that's but if they're just giving me their opinion on whatever issue of the day is, I can kind of do that. But if they want a specific pothole fixed or road paved, they need to email me. But I love it. I'm what I consider a friendly person, but what I've also learned in the mayor, I'm not a super outgoing person, which there's a difference between friendly and being really outgoing. And this job forces me to be super outgoing. So when I get, at the end of the day, I really get tired. Somebody who's really outgoing, like a Bill Clinton, thrives on this and just goes. Sometimes it's a struggle for me.
Well, I remember even when A.C. Wharton, towards the end, A.C. is one of the most upbeat guy. If you know him, I mean, you see him around town, he's just this upbeat guy. He was really worn down by the job, clearly. And there was almost, no one wants to lose. You beat A.C. Wharton. But there was almost a sense of relief in him, I thought. This is just Eric's interpretation of not having to do the job anymore. And having seen him now, he's back to the old AC and he's upbeat and so on. It's a grinding job. It's fascinating.
But what's so great about it is that there's a lot of great things going on in Memphis, and we can make it better, and we've made some things at City Hall better. And then we have real challenges. Yeah. And what I like about being mayor so much is I can see literally the next day progress that we're making. Congress, on the other hand, would be tougher for me because you don't see the immediate results of your work. And there's so much fighting, and as city mayor, you have to compromise just to get things done.
Well, to point to Bob Corker, former mayor of Chattanooga, now senator who's decided not to run again. I'm curious, and I've interviewed Bob Corker before, and you could see some frustration in him being one of 100 senators in one of two bodies and being so removed from the seat that you're in.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny. He spoke to the Rotary, one of the Rotary clubs in the last year, and I went and we were talking before, and I talked about how much I love being mayor, and he told me that being mayor of Chattanooga he loved and might have been his most favorite job.
Yeah. You mentioned your law practice with David Kustoff.
Yes.
Republican, now as we record this, Republican House member. Very different political views from you.
Yes.
How did that work? That's a marriage that is unexpected.
We were friends in college, and friendship to me trumps partisan politics, and we were always friends. He introduced me to my wife. We were law partners for 15 years or more. I know his parents, he knows my parents, I know his wife and kids. We're just good friends. Alan Crone is another one. He's a Republican and has been our friend. Trey Hargett,
special advisor to your administration.
Trey Hargett, who's Secretary of State, was a little bit younger than me, but it was in that group. To me, there's married couples, Mary Madeline and James Carville being kind of the most famous ones, that believe totally different things, but you can still be friends.
Do you think as mayor there's less straight Republican Democratic partisanship versus it's issue based? You may disagree with Kim Conrad on a given issue, the former chair of the city council, but on the next issue you agree with him, and it's all separate from party affiliation.
Oh, I've seen, and I've been 8 years on the council, almost a year and a half, 2 years as mayor. It is absolutely nonpartisan. It's just not a partisan thing at all that I've seen on any issue. It's just practical. Let's get things done, and people can disagree. And what I like about city government is not only it's nonpartisan, it's practical, and compromise is okay.
you're not punished in a primary,
Right.
what they talk about with Congress, where if you go too far to the left, you're going to get killed by somebody farther to your right, or vice versa.
Right. So in Washington, to me, one of the problems is that no matter what party you are, you're pulled either far left if you're a Democrat or far right if you're a Republican, because you could get primaried, as you said. And you're pulling away from the middle. And literally, there are people in both parties who don't want their senators or representatives to compromise. And to me, that's disheartening.
You mentioned you met your wife through David Kustoff. You have a wife and 2 kids?
2 children. I've got a 16-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. And my wife and I have been married 21 years. And we have a good life.
And they are excited. Were they supportive of the run? Were they, oh boy, you'll never win? I mean, what was that like for a family? Because we're talking about this commitment level and this going at it all day. I mean, how does that work?
Well, when I decided to run, I guess my daughter was about 10 years old, and Melanie and I brought the kids together and said, "Hey, I'm going to run for mayor next year against Mayor Wharton." And my daughter looked at me and said, "So?" I mean, she literally said that. So the kids have sort of enjoyed it. It's been tougher on my wife for sure, because my wife, Melanie, does work full time. Kids still doing activities, soccer and volleyball and tennis and school and that sort of thing. So it's definitely tougher on her.
And are you able to get to those soccer games and those, whatever those games, and people leave you alone and don't come up and do what I do, which is to bug you about issues on my mind? I mean,
for the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't mind when I'm in the grocery store, people coming up to me.
Well, and you said when you rolled out, the first budget you did was in some ways, I think, it was kind of Mayor Wharton's budget with some tweaks, because just the way the process works. The second one, in the capital improvement project, you did a relatively large increase in roads and potholes. And you said, anybody who criticized me for putting, I think, another $10 million, I believe it was, has never been to a neighborhood meeting.
Right.
And that's the grocery store, that's the neighborhood meeting, that's people saying, we can talk about big picture issues about Memphis, but for a lot of people it's bread and butter. Why is there a pothole in front of my street?
It's so funny you say that. This past Sunday, I've worked a soup kitchen since 1989, and 2 of the folks came up to me at the soup kitchen, and they said, separately, "Thank you for paving more streets. Thank you for paving streets in my neighborhood." It's a visible sign that you care about them, and it's also needed, because the roads had just gotten to a point where they were really bad, and we still have some bad roads. But it's the number 2 thing that I get complimented on. The first thing is the Friday emails that we send out. The second thing is paving roads, and we need to pave more of them. And they joke with me, Calvisi jokes with me at the office that one day I got to get up on this road paver and just pave them, because again, it's tangible and people really want them.
You ran on, and your first year and a half in office has been brilliant at the basics. You said it so many times it became a drinking game. Some people said every time the mayor says that we do a drink. But you're shifting. I don't know if it's intentional or it's just timing. There are bigger projects on the horizon as we tape this. Talking about major transformation of the riverfront, the Pinch District, the Convention Center. Is that an intentional? We've sort of fixed some of the bread and butter pothole issues, and we've got a better system in place, or is it more just the opportunity and time to go to some of these bigger picture projects?
I think it's both those. I think the first year we really wanted to focus. We strive to be brilliant at the basics. I don't think we'll ever actually get there. We're human beings, so we make mistakes. But when I say brilliant at the basics, I mean answer your 911 calls on time, pick up your garbage, fill more potholes, pave more streets, hire more police, drive down crime, clean up blight. And we still have challenges in some of those regards, but we've had huge success on 911 calls. Our animal shelter is adopting out more animals and euthanizing fewer. MWBE spend is way up.
Minority and women business.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then these opportunities have come up on the TDZ, Tourist Development Zone, which is a state law that allows us to keep the state portion of the sales tax to help build something that draws tourists. I give the example all the time, Dollywood somehow used that money to help with Dollywood. Nashville used it for the convention center. We've used it to help Graceland, one down there, and also to help put money into the pyramids of Bass Pro. So we want to, our riverfront is great. It's good. Our riverfront is good. We need it better. We need more people drawn to down there, and we have this TD with these state monies that we can use, but it's also going to require private money, and then we're going to do a TDZ at the fairgrounds. So these opportunities are there. If we didn't have TDZ, we couldn't afford to do these things.
We talked a little bit about, well, let's stay with that for a second. And for you, you won't be in office in 10 years, or term limited out if you run for and win a second term. But Memphis will look like, or Memphis will be what in 10 to 15 years? What do you hope you've put in motion in your time here?
That we're growing in population.
And that,
for 50 years, Memphis has lost population. And the only way that Memphis has gained population was annexing areas, extending sewers, annexing those areas. And that's the only way to gain population. We've slowed down the loss. Every year the census does an estimate. I think last year it was like 1,500 net lost, 1,500 or so people. We got to get that to zero and start growing us. A city, a business cannot sustain itself constantly losing customers or people. The cities that are struggling in the country, the big cities that are struggling, even Chicago and St. Louis and Detroit, they're losing population. We got to start growing. Though, Nashville's kind of growing so fast, they're having a hard time. Seattle is growing even faster than Nashville. We want growth because that's more jobs, more people, more opportunities. We want a thriving, growing city that's safe and fair and has great opportunities. When people think of Memphis, I want them to think, that's where I need to take my family.
And with just a little bit left here, the notion, I've lived in Memphis 20-something years, and it is a shift that other people have talked to me about. Of when I first moved here, people always talked about, oh, you can't get big things done, the pyramid. The pyramid, Sidney Schlenker, the whole fiasco that was, or they'll point to the failures. Do you have a sense, and I've heard other people say this, there's a shift in which things are possible, that it's not that sort of defeatism that somehow became, that spread among a whole lot of Memphians, that is less so?
I think so. I think the sense of optimism's happening, and I think it's a lot of reasons for that. Crosstown Concourse, we've shown as a community that we can do things really successfully. The rebirth of Overton Square and Cooper Young and like Crosstown Concourse, downtown continuing to improve. And things don't happen overnight. It's a long period of time. Nashville didn't start growing just overnight. To me, it was a success story 25 years in the making. Phil Bredesen was a really good mayor 25 years ago, and then followed up with 3 really good mayors, and that continued growth. I have optimism for the future of Memphis, and we need to capitalize on the good things. And I'll go back to being brilliant at the basics. You can have another drink. We cannot continue to all these great things unless we truly are brilliant at the basics. Blocking and tackling in football is important. It's just not all long pass plays. You got to block and tackle.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. That's all the time. Thank you for joining us on Newsmakers. Good night.
This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for this program is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Tonight on Newsmakers, Memphis Mayor Jim Strickland. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with the basics. Why politics? What got you involved?
Well, this is a long answer, so I hope you give me a little while. It kind of started in 1976. I was almost 12 years old. The presidential election was going on. And there's always that first presidential election you remember. And that's the first one I remember. And that's when President Carter beat President Ford. And it kind of piqued my interest. And I remember getting a weekly reader that had him on the cover. And as body president, became good friends with Alan Crone and David Kustoff, Trey Hargett, David Upton, Mara Sullivan, all the Jay Bailey, all these folks that have kind of gone on to politics in Memphis.
And your first city council race, am I right that you lost your first city council
I
race?
lost. I went door to door for 6 months. John Burgess, who's a sort of a mentor of mine, decided not to run again for city council, and I ran for his district, which is Midtown East Memphis. I was really a nobody. I'd been Democratic Party chairman, but that didn't get you any name recognition. And I ran against Carol Chumney, who just come out of the legislature for 14 or 16 years, built up a big name, and Dr. George Flynn, who could spend $500,000. So I did my best. I went door to door. And this is an interesting thing. You're broken up into precincts. That's where you vote. The precincts that I went door to door on, big time, 10 precincts, I won every one of those precincts. Problem was, as a Catholic, I started wondering, had there ever been a Catholic president? And that led to researching and President Kennedy, our only Catholic president. And so I started learning about him, watching his speeches, read Profiles in Courage, and really became inspired by his words of serving others and getting involved. And he was assassinated a year before I was born, so we didn't even overlap on this world. But really became inspired by him, as a whole generation did. And then later in life, it was either in high school or college, I sat down and read the whole New Testament at one time, like over a 2-day period of time. Had never done that. And you can't read the New Testament without realizing we are called to serve others, especially those less fortunate. I mean, it's a repeated mandate. And so the call to service that I sort of heard from President Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, to what Jesus was mandating in the New Testament. I figured, they were both service. And public service and my faith kind of fit together hand in glove. So I really became more inspired to do that, and I volunteered for some campaigns in the 80s when I was in college and law school. Became involved early 90s in the Democratic Committee, the local Shelby County Committee, then became chairman, and then off from there.
The first elections you were involved in, didn't you knock on doors in New Hampshire? Didn't you tell me that one time?
Well, in 2000.
That was in 2000.
When Vice President Gore was running for the Democratic nomination, Calvin Anderson, David Koch, and I and others went up to New Hampshire, and that's a great experience. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. You ought to, if you're really interested in politics, go up there, knock on doors. The snow's,
right.
Well, I remember
when you were running for mayor, you knocked on my door.
Yes.
You kind of came up and you were walking. It was it seemed like it was summer. It was about 800 degrees outside. And you came knocking on my door, ready to make another pitch. And I said, well, I've heard it. No,
but one of the things I've learned in politics, and I got this from Harold Byrd and Bobby Byrd and Dan Byrd. I forgot to mention, in '84, I interned in the state legislature as part of this, and one of my representatives was Dan Byrd, and the family owns the Bank of Bartlett, been involved in the community for a long time, and so I became close to them, and Harold Byrd told me one time, the best way to get anyone's vote, no matter what you're running for, is look them in the eye and ask for their vote. And the smaller district you're running for, the more you can actually do that. I did a lot of it when I ran for city council. No one's probably knocked on more doors than I did. And I even found time in my mayor's race to do that. You can't knock on the whole city, right. So we just kind of picked different areas.
Your first election, was it a high school, student council?
I went to Christian Brothers High School, and I ran for the commissioner of intramurals and lost to a good friend of mine named Tim Buckley. Who's now gone on to sports journalism. I stayed with politics. He got his fill, I guess, and decided he went into it. And then in college at the University of Memphis, I was student